Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever experienced something you just couldn't logically explain? Maybe you're thinking of a friend right before they text you, or you get this undeniable gut feeling about a situation that turns out to be exactly right. Well, today we are focusing our attention on something truly fascinating: the rigorous scientific exploration of those exact phenomena. We're going to look closely at how modern researchers are applying strict, no nonsense methodologies to concepts that historically lived way out on the fringes of science. And the goal? To understand the true limits of the human mind. Okay, let's dive into this. It's a massive, absolutely provocative question. Normally, when we talk about cognition, we think of inputs coming through our classical senses, sight, sound, touch, and outputs moving through our physical motor system, right? But what if the brain can actually access, integrate, or even influence information across non-local or non-temporal channels? In other words, can your mind somehow reach beyond the here and now? That is the core mystery we're exploring today, and we're relying entirely on structured, scientific data to do it. To navigate this landscape, we've put together a clear roadmap. We are going to start by framing extended consciousness and looking at how scientists actually measure the unseen. Then, we'll explore phenomena that seem to bend time, space, and physical systems, before finally tackling the ultimate boundary. Don't worry, it's a highly methodical look at some pretty incredible concepts. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Framing Extended Consciousness. We really need to establish our foundational scientific framework right out of the gate and strip away any of those pop culture myths. So let's redefine parapsychology. We are not talking about magic or fantasy here. We're talking about the scientific study of interactions between consciousness and physical systems that seem to operate beyond known sensory and motor mechanisms. From a neuroscience standpoint, we're simply framing this as extended information processing. It's about taking these unconventional processes and examining how they might actually show up in neural dynamics, physiological signals, and human behavior. Let's move to and see how this builds as we enter Section 2, Measuring the Unseen. Because, to study things that operate beyond conventional boundaries, you absolutely need exceptionally rigorous data. The truth is, parapsychology uses the exact same tools as mainstream psychology and neuroscience. The data basically falls into two primary buckets. On one hand, we've got qualitative data. This gives us the story. We're talking free responses, case studies of spontaneous experiences, and subjective self-reports. On the other hand, we have quantitative data, which gives us the hard numbers. This is where you see forced choice paradigms that test for statistical deviations from randomness, along with physiological measurements like heart rate and brain activity. When you put them together, these two streams map subtle informational effects directly onto measurable physical systems. Now that we know how the data is collected, let's shift our focus to the phenomena themselves. Section 3 covers the fascinating research that directly challenges our everyday, common-sense understanding of linear time and local space. First up is precognition. And listen, rather than viewing this as gazing into a crystal ball, modern science models precognition as a potential temporal extension of the brain's natural predictive processing. Think of it like your brain's everyday ability to guess what's going to happen next, but stretched across time to acquire info about future events that simply cannot be logically inferred right now. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how scientists test precognition. Let's walk through the associative remote viewing, or ARV protocol. It's like a mini narrative. Imagine you're the participant. First, you describe any impressions or images that pop into your mind. Second, researchers match those impressions to one of several possible future outcomes, like the movement of a stock or just a simple binary event. Finally, the correctness of that match is determined later, only after the actual outcome is known. It's just a beautifully structured piece of experimental design. Beyond ARV, there's a whole toolkit of time-bending tests. You have presentment studies, which measure things like skin conductance. They're looking to see if your nervous system physically reacts to an emotional image before a computer even randomly selects it. Wild, right? Then there are the famous BEM studies, which literally reverse standard psychology tests in time to see if future practice improves past performance. And other tests look for psi-mediated instrumental response, basically unconscious behaviors guided by rewards that haven't even happened yet. Moving from time to space, we have telepathy. And again, shed the sci-fi tropes here. Neuroscience frames this simply as interbrain information coupling. Think of it kind of like two minds syncing, like a Bluetooth connection. It's a measurable transfer of information between individuals without using any conventional sensory channels. So how do they isolate these potential signals? They use the Ganzfeld protocol. Picture this. The receiver is placed in a state of sensory homogenization. Basically, mild sensory deprivation using white noise and uniform light to just quiet down all that mental static. Meanwhile, in a completely separate location, a sender focuses intensely on a target image or video. The receiver then reports their impressions, and researchers rigorously compare those against the actual target and several decoys to see if they hit statistical significance. We also have to touch on other space-bending phenomena like clairvoyance and dream-based psi. Clairvoyance is accessing distant, hidden information without a sender, and it's primarily studied through controlled remote viewing. Dream psi, on the other hand, involves telepathic and precognitive dreaming. Researchers use perspective dream recording to capture the dream content first, and then they verify it against target materials or real-world events. All right, we are transitioning now from receiving hidden information to something equally profound. Section 4. Influencing physical systems. This is where we look at whether the mind can actively project influence onto matter and living systems. This is known as psychokinesis, or PK. Now let's be clear, we aren't talking about Jedi mind tricks lifting coffee cups across a room. That's macro PK, and it involves large, observable physical effects that are notoriously difficult to study under controlled lab conditions. Instead, scientists focus on micro PK. Here, participants actively attempt to bias the invisible output distributions of random number generators. It provides a highly controlled mathematical environment for strict statistical analysis. But it's not just tested on machines, it's tested on living systems too. Researchers study distant mental influence through remote helping and remote feeling. They're looking for physiological correlations when intention is directed toward another person's health at a distance. And on a much grander scale, they examine global consciousness effects. This is the wild hypothesis that large-scale human attention during major world events might actually correlate with anomalies in physical networks all across the globe. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it introduces Section 5, variables and anomalies. Because this field is uniquely challenging to study and the data is packed with complex nuances. Parapsychological data is notoriously complex to replicate, and these moderating variables are exactly why. First, you have experimenter effects, where a researcher's own expectations might quietly influence the outcome. Then there's the incredibly named sheep-goat effect, which shows that a participant's belief or even just their openness to psi phenomena actually changes their performance. And then get this, there's psi missing. This is when participants consistently score significantly below chance. Researchers don't view this as random error. They see it as an actual inverted effect. It's almost like the brain is actively avoiding the target. We've explored time, space, and physical matter. Now we're going to slow things down as we enter Section 6 to discuss the most profound, mysterious frontier covered in the source text. Does consciousness survive physical death? I mean, just let that sink in for a second. It is the ultimate boundary of human existence. But rather than approaching this through philosophy alone, let's look at the rigorous methods scientists are using to actively investigate this hypothesis. The research approaches here are incredibly meticulous. They study mediumship readings, but they assess them under strict double-blind conditions to prevent any information leakage. They test out-of-body experiences by using hidden remote targets that could only possibly be perceived from a separated vantage point. They gather characteristic physiological data from near-death experiences. They even conduct reincarnation research, which involves painstaking comparisons between reported memories and actual historical records. They're even utilizing entanglement paradigms to look for synchronized neural activity beyond expected physical levels. So the crucial point is this final, incredibly provocative question. Across all these domains, from predictive precognition all the way to the survival of consciousness, the central issue is whether the mind operates beyond conventional physical processes. And if it does, can we integrate these incredible interactions into a broader, more complete model of the brain? It completely redefines the potential of human cognition. So, the next time you have a gut feeling or a strange coincidence occurs, ask yourself, is it just chance? Or is it your mind operating beyond boundaries? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, keep questioning the limits of what you know.